Um, so my last name is actually Brichum, so it's Kofi Brichum, and I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Delaware. My major is agricultural economics, and today I'll be sharing with you a topic that is sort of dear to my heart on marketing. And I've titled this Beyond Break-Even Pricing Strategies That Pay in Produce Marketing. Um, okay, so um, we'll kind of start by examining maybe I've structured this around three key themes. The first will be pricing and profitability fundamentals. And so basically here I'll be talking about things, concepts like margins and markups and break-even analysis, dynamic pricing, target pricing, etc. And then we're going to look at price discrimination. What exactly is price discrimination and how can we leverage this to maximize our revenue and our profits? And then we're going to end with value creation, where I talk about concepts like bundling, things like branding, and then product differentiation. So let's start off with pricing and profitability fundamentals. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question, and my question here is trying to tease apart the difference between markup and a margin. What do these concepts really mean, and how do these help us as we think about our produce marketing? So first, we're going to look at markup. Markup is the percentage that I add to my cost to determine my selling price. So I do sell, I have an idea how much it cost me per unit of a product. Now, how much am I adding to this to become my selling price? That will be my markup. And then margin, I already know my selling price. Now, of this selling price, what proportion of it or what percentage of this selling price constitutes my profit? So these are, they are sort of somewhat related, but also very distinct. Whereas markup primarily focuses on profit more as a proportion of my cost, margin also focuses on profit, but this time as a proportion of my revenue. And now next, we're going to look at a few numbers to kind of help this make some more sense. So let's assume here that my cost of production or my cost of producing one unit of this produce is $10, just to make the numbers easier. My desired markup here is 25%. Now remember the definition of markup is what percentage I'm adding to this cost to determine my selling price. If my desired percentage is 25%, I want to add 25% of $10 to my cost, which is $10 to determine my selling price. And so with this, that will give me a selling price of $12.50. So it's $25 of the 10, 250, and then I add that to my $10 and I get $12.50. Okay. Now, what about if I know my selling price, if I have an idea of my cost of production, how do I compute my markup percentage? Okay. So same numbers, the cost of the product is $10, my selling price is $12.50. What is my markup percentage? Now, again, remember that the markup is the proportion of my profit is how much of my profit is relative to my cost, right? So the profit here, the difference between selling price and then the cost, that's $2.50. My cost is $10. And so if you do the math, it comes to the same markup percentage of 25%. Okay. Now, let's try to understand why this is necessary for us. Why should I focus on markup? Now, if I have an idea of my cost, and obviously I'm in this for profit, right? To return something extra beyond my cost. And so having an idea of my cost, the markup helps me to be able to, return some profit to cover my overhead. So that's why it's important. So again, just to rehash the same example, I'm producing strawberries. It costs me $8 to produce 1 pint, for example. If I want my markup to be 40% of this cost, 40% of the $8 would be $3.20. I add that, and that's $11.20, right? So why do I need to use markup? Because I want to make sure that I am covering my cost and I have something extra beyond this cost. And that, will constitute my profit. Okay. Now let's move on and look at margins. So again, just to recap, margin is, I know my selling price. Now, what proportion of this selling price constitutes my profits? That is my margin. So I'm going to use the same numbers again, just to make the math easy. The cost of me producing a product is $10 a unit. The selling price is $12.50. What is my margin here? Well, the profit hasn't changed, right? The profit is still $2.50, the difference between my selling price and then the cost of production. But then the margin, as we defined it, is the profit as a proportion of my selling price, right? And so in this case, the margin is going to be 20%. Another way of looking at this is, let's say the pie on the right represents the entire selling price. Now, what this is telling me is that 20% of this selling price constitute my profit. The rest is my cost. Okay. Now, you will notice, so for the markup, the percentage was 25%. For the margin is 20%. Now, it's always going to be the case that the markup percentage is going to be higher than the margin. And the reason is simple, is because you are dividing the same number, which is the profit, by a larger amount, which is the cost in the case of the markup, and a slightly, by a smaller amount, which is the cost in this case, because we assume that our cost is going to be lower than our selling price. Now, once we are dividing this same profit by a larger amount, you're going to get a smaller percentage. So that is why the markup is always going to give us a higher percentage than our margin. Now, again, let's say that I do have a markup percentage in my mind. How do I get to the selling price? So we can sort of rearrange the math a little bit. So still 20%, I have an idea of my cost. I just use a decimal here instead of just the percentage itself. So it's 0.2. And then that gives me the same amount, $12.50. So if I have a 20% margin in mind with a cost of $10, then my selling price will be $12.50. Same concept. Okay. Now, similarly, we want to look at why should we focus on margin. Now, again, my margin is telling me if I sell any one unit, what percentage of that am I getting as my profit? In the example that we saw, it was 20%. Now, it's incredibly useful when I am looking at different products. Now, if I'm producing different products, it comes with different cost streams. And so my markups may be different, but then the margin is going to kind of give me a baseline, some standard for me to compare profit across different products, or likewise different marketing channels, because the assumption is that you're going to sell things slightly differently at different market channels. And so your margin, again, will sort of give you a good benchmark about how much profit you are returning if you're selling at different markets. Again, if you're also thinking about profitability for your business, the markup, it's kind of helpful in a sense. Let's say you have two products with the same markup. The one with the higher margin obviously contributes more to your profit. So it's kind of good to have a sense of your margin as well. So in a sense, like a way to look at the markup and the margin is this. So the markup is focusing really more on how much I am adding to my cost. The margin focuses on how much I get to keep. right? Again, the markup focuses on how much I add, the margin is how much I keep. Okay, so hopefully this kind of helps to make the distinction between markups and then margins. The next thing I wanted us to look at is break-even analysis. You know, the title of my talk is break-even, beyond break-even. So what is break-even? So break-even is that point where I neither make a profit nor a loss. I'm just breaking even. And so it means that it's at that point where my total revenue is exactly equal to my total cost. Now I'm talking of total cost. Let's unpack it just a little bit. You very likely know that I'm talking about total cost. I'm looking at fixed cost and I'm looking at variable cost, right? So those two together make up my total cost, my fixed and my variable cost. What are my fixed costs? Fixed costs are any types of expense that doesn't change regardless of how much I produce, right? So, you know, mortgages, property taxes, insurance premiums. For smaller farmers, you'll be thinking about, do you have any greenhouse loan payments? That could be a fixed cost. Do you have any farmers market store fees? That could be a fixed cost. Do you have any website subscription? That could be a fixed cost. So anything that comes consistently, same amount, regardless of how much you produce, that is my fixed cost. Variable cost, again, the name suggests it's varying, right? So it varies with my level of production. How much seed, how much fertilizer I decide to use, how much fuel I use, how many people I decide to hire. Those could all change, you know, depending on how much I decide. And so that is my variable cost, right? If I decide to hire 2 people, obviously it's going to be cheaper than if I decide to hire 5 people, right? So that's my variable cost. Now back to break-even analysis. That is going to be the minimum cost at which my costs are all recovered, right? So the break-even price here per unit is going to be the fixed cost per unit added to my variable cost per unit. Okay. Again, it's kind of easier to show with some numbers. So let's assume here that I have a total fixed cost of $5,000, right? So let's say this is an annual expense that comes in, you know, with different, you know, between my internet subscription and my legal fees and my, you know, all the extra things that make up the fixed cost, you know, the loans and stuff. The number of units that I produce is 1,000 units. So again, you know, producing cucumbers, tomatoes, 1,000 units of that. Now, again, to make the numbers easy, I'm just going to go with $5 as variable cost per unit. Obviously, if my total fixed cost is 5,000 and I'm producing 1,000 units, then it suggests that my fixed cost per unit is going to be $5 a unit, right? And so between the fixed cost per unit and then my variable cost per unit, my break-even price is going to be $10. What is this telling me? It's telling me that if I charge $10, I'm giving the cost that I incurred, both fixed and variable, I'm neither making a profit nor am I making a loss. Now, beyond the break-even price, there's something else that I think it's also important for us to look at, and that is the break-even quantity. Right, the break-even quantity. How many units should I sell so that I'm breaking even? Now, to look at that, again, we're going to use the same numbers. So my fixed cost is $5,000. My variable cost is $5 per unit. Same as, you know, we saw in the previous slide, my price is $12.50. Now, given these numbers, what it means is if I sell any 1 unit, I'm bringing in $12.50. Of this $12.50, $5 is paying for my variable cost, right? So my labor cost, the seeds I use, the fertilizer I applied, all the extras that make up the variable cost. So per unit was $5. So if I sell any 1 unit, I'm making $12.50. $5 of that is going to cover the variable cost. Now, the amount that I'm left with, the $7.50, that is also called the contribution margin. You don't have to remember that it's called the contribution margin, but then I want you to remember that Well, there's a difference between how much I'm selling the product for and then how much is covering my variable cost, because that is important. Now, this 750, which we call the contribution margin here, that is not all profit yet, because remember that we have fixed cost to pay. And so this 750 difference between the selling price and my variable cost, aka the contribution margin, is going to go towards paying my fixed cost. So let's assume that, hey, I'm able to sell 100 units. Well, of that 100 units, the 750, it's going to be $750, right, in total for selling 100 units for contribution margin. Now that covers that much of my fixed cost. The total fixed cost is $5,000. If I sold 100 units, I'm able to pay $750 of this fixed cost, which means that if I sold 200 units, I'm able to pay $1,500 of this fixed cost, which means to say that if I sold 400 units, I'm able to pay $3,000 of this fixed cost. So the question is, how many units can I sell so that I just break even? I cover the entirety of my fixed cost. So this is where we use this break-even quantity formula. Again, giving the intuition is going to be the total fixed cost, the $5,000, divided by my contribution margin, which is 667 units. Okay, and so I need to sell 667 units of the produce, whatever I'm producing, in order for me to break even. Okay. Now, once I have reached this break-even quantity, right? This is my break-even quantity, right? Once I have reached that, my fixed costs are fully covered, right? And so from that point on, it means that each additional unit that I sell contributes its contribution margin directly to the profits, if that makes sense. Again, I'm going to, say it again. Once I have sold enough to cover my fixed cost, in this case, given our numbers, enough is going to be 667 units. Any extra that I sell, the fixed cost is already covered, right? So the contribution margin of any extra that I sell now goes directly to my profits. So next, we're going to look at target pricing. And as the name suggests, I'm targeting something, right? So I have a certain target profit in mind. I have a certain target return on investment in mind. How do I price my product, my produce, so that I can accomplish this? And so here you could look at it in terms of a cash amount or profit that you want to make, or you can look at it in terms of a percentage amount of profit that you want to make over your cost. And so the target pricing is very similar in many ways to the markup that we saw earlier. Again, looking at examples here, so total cost of production is $10,000, same numbers. I'm hoping to sell 1,000 units, and then my desired profit is $2,000. How much should I sell each of these so that I can, be able to reach my desired goal of making a $2,000 profit? So here, the price per unit, I'm sure you can just follow the formula. I add my target profit to my total cost. I divide by the quantity that I expect to sell, and then that is going to give me $12, right? So here, if I want to make a profit of $2,000 and it costs me $10,000 to make, I'm hoping to sell 1,000 units, and I need to sell each unit at $12 per unit. What about if I have a percentage in mind? And then this takes us very directly again to our markup, right? So if my cost of producing this good per unit is $10, my desired return, my desired profit is 20%. Same formula as the markup, right? So it's 20% over my cost. You add that to the cost per unit, and it's the same, $12. Okay. Now, talking about this, we also need to get practical and realistic, in the sense that not all produce always make it to the market, right? For a variety of reasons. there could be perishability issues, grading, weather. So there could be different issues, different reasons why we may not be able to sell everything that we produce. How should this inform the type of prices that we set? Because in other words, what we're saying here is because I'm not going to sell, I produce 1,000 units, I'm probably not going to sell all 1,000 units. Now, these losses should be accounted for as I decide on the price that I want to set. All right. So I'm going to call this one the effective cost per marketable unit because I'm not selling everything. And so when I'm computing my markup or computing what price to sell, I need to take this into account. All right. So again, here's another example. Let's say my cost of production is $10,000. Now I produced 1,000 units, but then I'm only, again, for whatever reason, profitability, grading reasons, I'm only able to sell 800 units. I still have the same desired profit in mind of $2,000. What should be my price? So the only difference here is instead of dividing by the 1,000 units, I divide by 800 because that is the units that I actually hope that I can sell, right? And then that gives me a price of $15 per unit. Of course, this gives you a good benchmark with which you can calibrate, your eventual selling price, given other factors like, competitor pricing and whatnot. The other thing that I want us to look at is dynamic pricing. And as the dynamic, so it's kind of moving, right? So this is a strategy where prices are adjusted, based on a variety of market conditions, such as changes in supply and demand, such as competitor prices, produce perishability, and a host of other reasons, right? And so it kind of really helps us, to evolve with the times, so to speak. You want to capture profits when demand is strong. You want to sort of ride the waves, when supply it's high and demand is not nearly as strong, even if it were, supply is high. And then at the end of the day, you still want to sell, so you want to reduce your waste when the market slows down. And so I do have an example here that looks more at seasons. It could be any other, it could be for any other reason, any other factor. So there could be an early season premium, with fruit, with vegetables, where because there's limited supply, you could definitely capture that premium if you sell it first on the market, right? Because at that point, people might be willing to pay much higher. Then it gets to a point where the market is saturated, right? And so you have to rethink your prices a little bit. Either you want to reduce them or whether you want to bundle. We're going to talk about bundling in the very last segment. And then late season discounts, right? So you have a lot of inventory. You want to sort of reduce your inventory. It's better to sell some than to lose completely, right? So you think about how much discount do I need to offer in order to be able to sell my produce. So here's some numbers that I gave. You could see on the price column, the second column, I have different tiered pricing. So for the early season, I'm going to sell this at $6. I imagine these are all hypothetical numbers. By the way, the cost per pint is $2.50, which means that if I'm able to sell $400 in the very first row, my cost is going to be $1,000. If my price is $6, I sell 400, my revenue is 2,400, and so it gives me a profit of 1,400, and so on and so forth. So I have these tiered pricing depending on the season. Now let's contrast this with when I have the same price streams. I'm selling this at $4.50 throughout. The only difference that I did here was in the late season, because your price is high, you probably will lose a little bit on demand. And that can be still substantial, right? Because you're comparing 4,000 here to 3,225. Okay, so I'm next going to look at price discrimination. So this is the second segment of, now this is much shorter, and then the last one is even shorter. So price discrimination. We know what discrimination is, right? It's unfair. It's unequal treatment of individuals, and it's not, it's not socially desirable. However, price discrimination is a little different. It's actually a smart way and a recognized way of leveraging the markets to earn more profits and more revenue. So what is price discrimination? It's the practice where you charge different prices to different people. So again, it's discrimination with a price on top. Is it fair? Absolutely, it's fair. And retailers price discriminate all the time, as you probably know. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I'm just going to focus on two types of price discrimination: second-degree price discrimination and then third-degree price discrimination. Of course, if there's second and third-degree price discrimination, then it tells you there's first-degree price discrimination. I'm not exactly talking about that because it's more of a theoretical concept. First-degree price discrimination is where I charge each person exactly how much they will pay for a product. Now, evidently, that is much harder for us to know, right? How do I know that person A is willing to pay X amount and person B is willing to pay Y? That's kind of a little hard. Second degree and third degree have ways you can work around to be able to accomplish that. So second degree price discrimination is really charging different prices per unit depending on the quantity, right? So you're charging different prices more based on, in a sense, you're kind of offering, quantity discounts here. So in this case, you might have like a menu of prices, and then people sort of self-select into what fits them much better. So you have bulk buyers who might, get the discounts, but then they are buying in bulk. And then you have light buyers who pay slightly higher prices, but then they don't need the volume, right? And so here's what is happening. When you're offering these bulk discounts, you are not just lowering your prices, but you're also encouraging or inducing bigger purchases, which overcomes the discounts that you are offering. So let's again look at hypothetical scenarios. Let's say that you're selling tomatoes at a farmer's market at $3 per pound. Okay. Now you have your light buyers, singles, maybe couples with smaller households who would buy 2 pounds at a time. Then you have these larger households who will buy 5 pounds at a time. Now, if you're selling at the same price, so let's say you're selling at $3, like we initially mentioned, at 2 pounds for the small households, you're making and then let's say there are 40 buyers, you're making a revenue of 240, right? So 2 times 40 times 3 gives you the 240. The larger households will buy 5 pounds, but you're selling at the same price of $3. Now, your total revenue here across these 60 buyers is 540. Now, let's contrast this with when you decide to price discriminate. And so here you're offering quantity discounts. You're saying, hey, if you buy up to 3 pounds, you're going to pay $3 per pound. But then if you buy more than 3 pounds, you're going to pay $2.50 per pound. Does this work? Yes, it does. Because what you're doing, again, remember, is that for the bulk discounts that you are offering, you are inducing larger purchases, right? People will say, oh, this is just $2.50 to the pound. I'm going to buy a little extra. And so the extra, I just adjusted the quantity per buyer from 5 pounds to 7 pounds. And then that makes a whole difference of 590, right? Versus 540. So that surely does make a difference. Now, third degree price discrimination is slightly different. This is where you're charging different prices based on observable characteristics. How can you tell? I mean, can you really tell who has deep pockets by just looking at them? Well, some of the characteristics that can help us is location. If you are, in an affluent zip code, obviously you have people who might be willing to pay a little higher than if you're in the midstream, middle class, neighborhood and so on. Type of customer, you could price discriminate based on whether the person is a veteran or is a senior or is a student, etc. Right. And here you can actually ask them to prove, right? I mean, you all can see seniors, but then for students, you can say, hey, I need your ID card. Um, Teachers, educators, etc. Market channel, right? You might charge a little higher if you're selling at the farmers market versus at the wholesale. And so again, the point here is, are these different silos? People have different price sensitivities, and you are just leveraging that to you know make as much as you can on your revenues and then on your profits. So here I have three examples of farmers market, wholesale, pick your own. At farmers market, here you're looking at shoppers who really value what is local, what is fresh. And so you can charge $5, they'll be willing to pay that. Now, for the wholesale, the price is $3.50 because again, you're dealing with more price sensitive buyers, right? So you want to be cognizant of that. And then pick your own. I said, well, 250. These are all hypothetical, by the way. These are people who, cherish these experiences and once they go on farms. And so total revenue here is $4,000. This contrasts with when I do have the same price across the different market channels, right? Because here the only difference that I have is the wholesale, because the price may be too high, you might lose a little bit on your demand from 500 to 400. The pick your own, you're still charging for the price may be too high, and you might lose a bit of demand. And then for farmers market, you're charging a lower price than people would have been willing to pay for, right? So then you still, your total revenue here is 3,600, slightly lower than the 4,000 you could have made if you price discriminated. And then finally, we're going to look at value creation beyond price. And so here I want to talk about bundling. And bundling is where you sell two or more products together at a single price. And why does it work? It works because consumers have different reservation prices for different items. Now, the question then is, what is reservation price? That is the maximum amount that people are willing to pay, right, for any item. So people will always buy items as much as we call this my price point, right? As much as is at their price point or below, they are willing to pay for it. So that is their reservation price. Okay, so let's again use some numbers, sometimes just a little bit more intuitive that way. Let's say that a farmer sells two types of produce, lettuce and then cucumbers. Now, this farmer has two customers, Mary and Jake. For lettuce, Mary will pay $4, Jake will pay $3. And then for cucumbers, Mary will pay $2, Jake will pay $2.50. Okay. Now, here's a way to look at this. If this farmer wants both Mary and Jake to purchase lettuce, they will need to price lettuce at $3 a unit, right? Because if it's at $3, Jake is going to buy, Mary is going to buy. If it's at $4, only Mary gets to purchase. Okay. So without bundling, if I want both Jake and Mary to buy lettuce, I have to price it at $3. And that fetches me a revenue of $6. For cucumbers, same concept. If I want both of them to buy, I need to price it at $2. And then, at $2 for the two customers, that is $4. And so the total here is $10. Now, what is different if I bundle these together? Now, if I bundle them, look at Mary's reservation price. It's going to be $6, right? So lettuce at $4, cucumbers at $2, that's $6 for Mary. Same for Jake, and so will be willing to pay 550. Now, if I want both of these customers to purchase the bundled product, I need to charge 550. And at 550, both of them are going to buy, right? But if I charge at 550, then my revenue coming in is going to be $11, right? So obviously, bundling is more advantageous if you can be creative about it. In a way, it's also letting customers reveal their preferences through the choices, through the bundle choices that you present to them. So with bundling, obviously you want to make sure that you have complementary products, and then there are a couple of things that this is doing. One, you're creating convenience, right? So instead of the person buying carrots and then going to buy cucumbers, you're bundling them for them, you're bundling these products, and then they find the convenience. And then, of course, the convenience also comes with a very simple decision making. All right. I pick one product, it has these different items that I was looking for. And between convenience and the simplification of my decision, it adds value that people are willing to pay for. Now, I'm going to wrap this up with other ways to create value, and that is branding and storytelling. Um, as people, we definitely cherish stories, right? We identify with stories, stories about families, about their heritage, about how things are produced, about community involvements, any other stories that seem to have some emotional attachments, are things that people value. And guess what? You can actually take advantage of this to upcharge because once consumers feel like a personal connection, emotional connection, they might be willing to pay a bit of a premium because of that story. Um, and so that brings us to product differentiation here. And here I'm specifically looking at how you can use your story, your voice, to make your product unique, whether it's because you are selling heritage varieties, whether it's because you produce pesticide-free or you use organic manure, or you produce sustainably. These days, people value sustainably produced or sustainably grown products. Whether your product is fresh, you just picked it, within the past couple of days. All of these are things that people appreciate and cherish, and then they might be willing to pay price premiums for them. And so eventually, I'll say that with differentiated products, right? Whether you are differentiating based on your special heritage or your story or your production method, it kind of shifts, people's demand up, or it shifts their willingness to pay up. And so, in a sense, they become less price sensitive and willing to pay a price premium for that. So, just wanted to keep it short and sweet under 40 minutes. And I hope that you found some of these concepts helpful. Um, Happy to take any questions as they come.
People would like to put in the chat. I don't see any right now.
Okay.
I will stop recording, and if you'd like to unmute, you can do that as well.